Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Continuing our run through of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Right now we're up to the episode called Far Beyond the Stars. 13th episode of the 6th season. Aired on February 11th, 1998. Teleplay goes to Irish Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler. Story goes to Mark Scott Zicree. Directed by Avery Brooks. In this episode, experiencing a vision from the prophets, Sisko sees himself as Benny Russell, a sci-fi writer in the 1950s who struggles with civil rights and inequality while he writes the story of Captain Benjamin Sisko, a black commander of a futuristic space station. We're joined by Clay, as always. Clay, how are you?
I'm good. I did not know, going into this episode, that I would learn that Mark Alamo has better skin as a Cardassian than he does as a human.
You don't think that's makeup when he's in his real or his unmade up, or at least un-Cardassian appearance?
I don't think so. I think that's just how he looks like he looks like he's seen some shit.
Yeah, he's done a few rounds in the Saw movies or the Hostel or something like that, I think. Yeah, a lot of people out of makeup in this one. It's a very special episode.
I did notice, because specifically they were doing, what they were doing. Severe lack of Garrick this season.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
I had never really thought about it until this one. I was like, oh, that's cool. Everybody who's usually in makeup is not, but there's no Garrick. And then it made me think, oh, he hasn't really been in the season at all. Yeah,
that's true. He's not since the war arc or the occupation arc, I don't think. I don't think we've seen him in an episode since then. I don't think they explained that he was off doing anything, so I don't know what he's been up to.
Yeah.
Something to check in on, I suppose. But let's, I guess we'll take a break. We're going to play an audio clip, and then me and Clay are going to come back, and we're going to break down Far Beyond the Stars.
All right, next order of business. Some of our readers have been writing in wanting to know what you people look like.
Oh, right back and tell them we look like writers. Poor, needy, and incredibly attractive.
Well, our publisher has a better idea. Mr. Stone has decided to run a picture of you in next month's issue.
Was that absolutely
necessary? I'm afraid it is. Kay, you can sleep late that day.
Of course I can. God forbid the public ever finds out that Casey Hunter is a woman.
I suppose I'm sleeping late that day, too.
It's not personal, Benny, but as far as our readers are concerned, Benny Russell is as white as they are. Let's just keep it that way.
Oh, yes. If the world's not ready for a woman writer, imagine what would happen if it learned about a Negro with a typewriter.
Okay, so here we are, Clay. It's DS9's version of The City on the Edge of Forever, I think, is the way that a lot of people think of this. And I don't think that they're wrong to think that. You would actually...
I don't know if I would say that.
I guess here's why I'll say that. When we did the City on the Edge of Forever podcast, you had said that Balance of Terror is your favorite TOS because you give that credit for being the show in like a more pure version of what the show actually is than City on the Edge of Forever, which is kind of like a off the beaten path version of a TOS episode. And I think that City on the Edge is like, it's pretty clearly, or obviously to me, my what I think is the best episode of TOS. And I think that Far Beyond the Stars is kind of similar in the sense that I guess it sort of gave me an appreciation for why episodes like this are highly regarded as they are. This is a very highly regarded episode of DS9. I think what happens is that after a long time, or many episodes, it was only in TOS's case, it was like 30, but it's still a lot of episodes. After a bunch of episodes where you're kind of seeing the same thing and characters wearing their makeup and you're on DS9 and everything like that, I think sometimes episodes like this are really memorable and impactful because they sort of give you a kick in the head a little bit to like reboot how you view the series. And I think that when they do things like this, it kind of lets you recalibrate yourself and understand what the series is good at and what it thinks about things. And I think that that's what City on the Edge of Forever did in like the TOS 60s ethos of what was going on in the world. And I think that Far Beyond the Stars, it sort of like recalibrates or like restarts your brain in thinking about what DS9 has been talking about for a long time, but it does it in a more grounded way than the Star Trek setting allows for. And I think that that's why they're so memorable.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant like plot wise, just because they went back to they're in the 50s America or something like that. And I was like, well, there's no time travel, and there's actually no.
Not sure this
conflict.
actually happened. Not sure this is actually real.
Yeah, my biggest issue I really liked it. I thought it was great. My biggest issue from a plot standpoint is there is, unless I missed it, absolutely no explanation for what's happening at all. They don't even try.
Yep. Well, the little blurb at the start here says he's experienced a vision from the prophets, which I think is kind of a stretch. I don't think they actually say that in this. They mention the prophets, but I always get the impression that that's just because they're trying to tie in real world Sisko stuff into his fantasy.
If this is a vision from the prophets, it's like the prophets just smoked a giant bowl of weed, because it's like the prophets going like, well, what if, you're just like some guy's thoughts, man. And
then have the characters talk about it. How none of this could be real.
So I was surprised. I was surprised that they didn't even attempt to give it a sci-fi spin or explanation or anything like that. And I'm sure mileage will vary on whether or not you like that better, because I could see it being a choice that people actually like better. I just find it surprising for Star Trek that they wouldn't even try to attempt to explain it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. The thing that stood out to me, I think another reason why these episodes stand out and are highly memorable is because, kind of as an offshoot of what you're talking about you seeing the same stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The cast is feeling the same way, and episodes like these let them all stretch their legs quite a bit, and I could tell everybody in this episode was having a blast doing it. Everybody seemed like they were having a lot of fun getting to do some different acting.
They didn't have to wake up at 4 a.m. to put the makeup on for 3 hours before they started their day. Yeah.
Well, except for poor Alemo and what's his name? Jeffrey Combs had to do it for like
Worf does too. Worf does
That's
too.
true.
Yep.
All three of them had to do it for like maybe 5 seconds worth of screen time. But yeah, I mean, you can tell they're all having a lot of fun. I thought Rene Auberjonois was great. Like I think he stands out as being the most different from his character, just because his whole voice is different and his whole approach to everything was different. I was really surprised that he was that much different as that character.
I'm going to spoil it now because I think it's too good of a point to touch on. But one of the patrons mentioned that you could kind of use this episode as a gauge about their general acting talent levels. Like the way that each character is played is kind of a good way to rank the versatility or the quality of the actors. I'd agree with you that Auberjonois is probably at the top. Sherman's very good in this one. A surprisingly bad turn from Colm Meaney for whatever reason. He went into this going like, you know what? I'm going to do an American accent. And that just took over his whole method. And it didn't work for him, unfortunately. And I would say the bottom is poor Ciroc Lofton, who I don't know what he's doing. Like,
he's at least going for it.
He's going for it. Yeah.
He's got a character that he's choosing to do. I mean, I would put him higher. I would arguably put him higher than Michael Dorn, whose entire character was just like, I'm going to lean on this counter and smile at people.
That's the problem with the Dorn character is I'm not sure he really has a reason to be in there at all.
Right. Yeah. He's kind of superfluous.
I'll bring up the point later about Dorn, which is kind of why he's stuck doing that. But I do. I guess let's start with the acting in this before we get into anything, because I do agree with that comment that it's a great way to see how I would rank the acting quality or the acting strength of the whole cast. And I think that you can easily sort of go down the list and see who's the best, who's in the middle, and then who has the hardest time changing up what they're doing. What I thought was interesting was that it's kind of neat to see who is a better actor in each universe. Like, I think that Auberjonois, Sherman, Alemo, Dorn, and Visitor are pretty good in both the Star Trek universe and the 1950s universe.
Yes, yeah.
I was struck by how much more casual and comfortable Cassidy Yates seems in the 1950s than she is whenever she's on the Star Trek universe, where she seems really stilted.
Yeah. I think, I think part of the problem might be that Cassidy Yates is sort of a nebulous character to latch onto, whereas I think the character she's playing here is pretty solid as to what her deal is. You know, It's relatable. It's more down to earth. It's easier to draw from, to inspire your acting. Whereas Cassidy Yates is like, she's there. She might be a terrorist. She's kind of not a terrorist anymore. She's in love with Sisko. She was in prison. I don't even know what she does anymore. Is she like a teacher or something?
For a job in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
No, she's still a freighter captain because they're talking about that.
Okay, sorry, freighter captain. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like it's a little bit more, you're kind of going off of a character like that. You're kind of going off of what you have on the page, scene to scene. Whereas something like she's playing in the 50s, it's like, okay, you can get into the mind of this character pretty easily.
Yeah. I wonder if it's the more interesting person I thought was, and I think this ties in the way that we've always described him. I think that Combs is way better as Wei-Yun than he is as the cop, which is interesting to me. I think Alemo knocks it out of the park as both Ducat and his cop.
He was great. I actually looked him up afterwards. I was like, what the hell else has this guy been in? Because he's such a good actor.
Yeah.
And he's been in a lot of TV, but not a ton of anything high profile aside from this.
Yeah, but the Combs thing, how we always talk about how he's 5% camp, backfires when he's in a real world situation. Interestingly, like he plays this kind of like he plays it a sort of a slight parody of what a New York cop would be like, which is and it comes across as a little bit stilted. Where Alemo is actually really threatening in his appearances here.
Yeah. And I was most interested to see what he looks like without his makeup because I had no idea. And I also had this picture of someone with like a very long bird-like neck because his Cardassian makeup makes his neck look 20 feet long.
Yeah.
And so I was expecting this really oddly shaped person, but he looks more or less normal.
Yeah. Did you have anything you want to say about the acting? I just thought it was really interesting about like it's a good way to just see the versatility of people and to see who struggles and who has a good time and who surprises you by how well they can play a more grounded character and things like that. I think it's just kind of a neat experiment.
Yeah. What was actually funny is I wasn't totally sure how everybody was going to react or what their style was going to be, what their character was going to be until they started talking, except for Dax. As soon as I saw Dax, I was like, I know exactly where this is going. And then she started talking like the nanny, and I was like, yep, that's exactly what I expected she was going to do.
Is it a good performance or not? I had a hard time ranking her about whether or not.
I thought it was fine.
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
it's intentional.
I think it's, the energy and the fun of it is more attractive than the quality. I think across the board.
Yeah.
You know, like ciroc Lofton, sure, he's doing this weird, 50s street grifter thing.
They feel like cartoonish versions. Lofton and Terry Farrell feel sort of like they're aware that they're playing a campy version of the 50s, but the other characters feel a little bit more grounded. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's nice to get a good mix of that, but they're like the Aubergenois performance is a totally grounded thing as opposed to whatever ciroc Lofton is doing and whatever Terry Farrell is choosing to do.
Yeah, I will, as much as Colm Meaney maybe kind of whiffed on it a little bit in this one. I do have to give him credit for when Aubergenois is like, yeah, but he doesn't write about Negroes and whites. He writes about robots. And then they cut to him and he's like, yep.
That's what I do. I like that little touch. Yeah, I think Colm Meaney actually got distracted by his pipe as well because he's doing a lot of business with his pipe.
I feel like he saw this as an opportunity to really bite off more than he could chew. And so he's like, I'm going to do prop work. I'm going to do an accent. This is going to be what gets me my daytime Emmy or whatever.
Yeah.
Regular Emmy. And it just was, I think he was overwhelmed a little bit. As far as acting goes, though, did you feel like Avery Brooks didn't really change much? He seemed like he was just normal. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Everybody else kind of like affected a new character, whereas Avery Brooks just kind of felt like, well, this is more or less Ben Sisko. Maybe not as assertive, but there wasn't as much of a change. It was a lot more subtle, I thought.
I feel he's more nervous and meek than Sisko is, and I think that shows in sort of the ending scenes and the beginning scene and everything. I think that it's obviously intentional because he's a character who's obviously been under the heel of the boot for during as a black man in the 1950s, and he kind of breaks out of it. I mean, we can't really talk about the performances without Avery Brooks's. His breakdown at the end is a very famous Star Trek scene. His sort of monologue about it being real, the world being real. It's not a great performance, unfortunately. I don't think Avery Brooks continues, in my opinion, he just overplays things like that a little too much, and it's too bad. I don't think he kills the scene. I sort of cringe or wince 5% of that. I think it works, and I still think that it lands and everything. But he really he goes a little bit too theatrical in situations like that, and it just comes across as kind of stilted. It's not bad. I like the rest of his performance. It's really just that scene, which is very famous, but I'm always distracted by it.
Yeah, I actually liked it. I mean, it's the first time I'd ever seen it, so maybe the third time you see it, it kind of starts to really stand out how over the top. I mean, it's obviously over the top, but I actually really enjoyed it because I think the rest of the episode is played so quietly. He kind of has a nice progression of intensity that kind of ends with him exploding at the end there. But yeah, I would agree. He probably could have dialed it back a bit. But he definitely went for it. Yeah,
he did. He also directed the episode, Avery Brooks,
right? Yeah,
which is he said that this is his favorite episode of the series. He directed it. The production team thought that since they are basically all white, that they needed a black man to direct it, and I think that's an appropriate choice that they made. Mm-hmm. I think that it's a we've mentioned this before. I think I've talked about this with DS9 before about previous episodes, particularly in the Occupation arc, felt like they're mature Star Trek episodes.
Yeah.
I feel this is kind of becoming to me the defining trait of what DS9 feels like in a way that's different from the other Star Treks, where this feels like a very adult version of the show in a way that they could have easily done this incredibly ham-fisted racism allegory that wouldn't work, and instead it's particularly nuanced, and I think that the way that they tie the characters from DS9 into this universe and make them, they're still kind of their DS9 characters, except they're transported into this world where everything's a little bit different, really works well. And I think that they, the best example I guess I can think of is Auberjonois as Odo. He carries Odo's respect for order more than justice. He believes strongly in this is the way things need to be. He'd probably be considered the conservative of this group, and in fact, he calls Shimmerman a communist, basically, as an insult in one of the things. But Auberjonois has the conservative viewpoint, which is to see things through the lens of barbarism versus civilization, and he carries that from Odo, where the changelings and the founders view order and knowing your role is more important than actually being a just universe, and he's not willing to rock the boat. But the way that ties in is so subtle, because I would not call Auberjonois' 50s character a racist, really. He's more just someone who believes in the way of things, and he wants to keep the boat going smoothly. So while he is not particularly a racist character in the way that the cops are, he is still a sort of insidious version of how racism exists in the world.
Yeah, he's the kind of character who's if they complain that the black people can't eat with the white people, he's going to be well, I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
Right. Yep, you have a seat right there.
Whether or not he believes that to be true or to be, the correct way of things is kind of irrelevant. It's just well, that's the way things are. And, is generally used as kind of a cop-out, I think depends on the character or the person, where you can fall back. I mean, the easy thing to do is to fall back on that order, right? Yeah. It's the easy thing to do is to say, well, sorry, that's just how things are, instead of actually making a stand for something that you do or don't believe in.
Yep. Well, this is complicated for this character, right? He's basically the editor of this paper. He's supporting the jobs of many other people, at the expense of not being able to publish Benny Russell's papers. You know, like
Right.
there's he has other things going on in his head as opposed to just sort of towing the line, which is what I think works for that character.
Yeah, and I mean, he's got he's not like hard and fast. Like he works with Benny Russell. Is that his name?
Yeah, Benny Russell.
He works with Benny Russell and the rest of the group to kind of find a loophole. Because he's going off about them. There's no way they'll publish this story about a black captain, and then once the idea of making it a dream comes up, he's like, okay, well that's some wiggle room that I can work with.
Yeah.
So he's not exact. He's not. Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily call him a racist, but he's definitely one who's like, we are working inside a specific set of boundaries, like it or not. Unfortunately.
Yep. Yeah, and the I think that's a nicely subtle way to look at it. I think that he is just he's a clever character who blends well with his Odo persona, and I think that everything works out kind of well like that. But I would like to say anyone who complained about Discovery being about the fact that Star Trek was never political or dealt with race issues or anything, you should go back and watch this episode. It's funny when you see them without their makeup, how few white people are in the main cast of this. You know, there's there's a lot of black actors in this cast, enough where they can have a scene where a whole bunch of characters are having conversations with each other in a black diner in New York in the 50s.
Yeah.
I think that I think the reason that I like it is that I think that the themes of this episode are really everything that DS9 has been talking about for its entire run. And I think that DS9 always gets a lot of slack for being sort of the cynical and subverting Roddenberry's ideals. I completely disagree with that. I think what DS9 did is that it took a view of Roddenberry's ideals and it made them more realistic. In a way, it moved away from TNG's like, okay, everything's perfect, and let's try to like make a story out of this now that we're living in a perfect world. It took more of a realistic, interesting approach where the characters in this universe still have problems that can be linked back to modern day society and like current issues that we're going through, and you think that problems that are never actually going to go away. And the Dominion War piles onto that. And I think that what this episode does is I said it before, but it like restarts your opinion of everything. Like I love the fact that the Dominion characters in Dukat are the cops in this episode, who are the racist cops, because I think what happens when you see the Dominion over and over again, you kind of lose track of how horrible the Dominion are, because I don't know if the show sells them well enough at what they are. Yeah. Like it brings up that they're this authoritarian group that sort of believes in racial caste systems and enslavement and like a kind of fascistic approach to running the world. And for some reason, when you bump it back into the 1950s setting, it actually hits harder than it does in any other situation where they're on a Star Trek universe. I don't know if you felt that way.
Yeah, I think it comes down to it's tough with the Dominion just because of the scale of what they are. And, budgetarily, they can't show a lot of it. And it doesn't matter how many times you talk about someone doing something, it's still going to be kind of hard to wrap your head around exactly what's going on. You could have like an entire episode that was just a dissection of Dominion politics to show how bad they are. And it's like, okay.
It's just not visceral.
Yeah, it just doesn't have the same attachment. It's like I've said, previously. It's like when you go big like this, you need to have something small to anchor it, something small and relatable. Where, in the 50s here, extremely relatable. You can drawing a one-to-one connection between the Dominion and Dukat and racist cops in the 50s. It's like, oh yes, I understand that. That's very easy to wrap my head around.
Right. This is not a universe that you want to live under. This is not the kind of people that you want in charge. Is a re-strengthening of why the war is important for the Federation in a way that I think the previous episodes kind of have a trouble with. And it's funny that you can have this galactic war where starships are exploding, but for some reason, Benny Russell getting hit with a blackjack by two corrupt cops is like more impactful than any of the starship battles.
Yeah. It's interesting how scale works like that. Having something like that is small and personal and relatable is always going to win. That's why a lot of the movies that have these giant battles are usually cutting back and forth between something a lot smaller. Like, you know, most of the secondary Star Wars movies end up cutting between a space battle and two people just fighting each other.
Yeah, yeah. Game of Thrones, you have Arya running through the city while the battle is raging, in the Bell Tolls episode. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think that I really just think it reboots it. Like, I can't stress that enough. What it does is it shows you why the DS9 universe is what it's talking about. And it's kind of like a I don't know if aperitif is the right thing, like a palate cleanser almost. Like, I just really enjoy the fact that it highlights what the show thinks and what it's been talking about. DS9 is where TNG was interested in sort of like this perfect humanism of things. DS9 is more interested in the anti-humanism, which would be like bigotry and racism and xenophobia and everything like that. And that ties into what I think was a kind of a big mistake, and this is the Dorn thing. In this episode, ciroc Lofton is the one who's shot by the cops for trying to break into a car, and Benny Russell gets beat up. The original idea was that the ball player that Michael Dorn plays is dating a white woman, which is a parody of Worf and Dax. Well, not a parody, but it's an homage to Worf and Dax. And he is beaten to death by the cops for that transgression. So
I wonder why they nixed that. I mean, it's a better idea. I think it drives the point home better, but fuck, that's dark, man.
It is dark. It's funny because I guess it's just the personal nature of them beating him to death as opposed to kind of just, it's not really an accident, but they shoot ciroc Lofton, which feels less bad for some weird, bizarre reason. But either way, you end up with a dead character. But I think that the Dorn thing it's certainly darker, but I think it ties into the universe in a way that I would have liked to have seen, where ciroc Lofton's thing kind of feels like it has to happen to make Benny Russell do that in a way, and it feels a little bit more artificial, I think, than the Dorn dating a white woman does.
Yeah, I would agree.
Adult idea though, like I'm shocked it even made it to the idea, the script, the initial draft of the script, that they were going to consider doing that. Yeah,
I would assume they changed to ciroc Lofton's character just maybe for the Jake parallel, where it's like, oh, is Jake's being shot kind of thing. Yeah,
like his son. That's a character that's seen as a son, sort of.
Like if you're going to kill someone, I guess that would be the second choice. But yeah, that's a very adult idea for this, and it would be very dark and very intense.
Yeah,
and it's honestly, if you're getting into this sandbox, that's probably the way to go.
Yeah,
I mean, because that is going to have an incredible effect.
They use the N-word in this episode.
I know. Yeah. Do you think they had to draw straws to see who had to say it?
ciroc Lofton's character makes sense to say it, I think, right?
It does, yeah.
The Dorn character I don't really see saying it, and Benny Russell wouldn't, I don't think. And the other thing that's never been said in Star Trek before is Aubergine was is for Christ's sake, which is nice. And there's also a reference to the Bible in this episode. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really happy that they didn't have one of the white characters say it, just because I feel like that's, too easy, and really, again, it's really intense. And I think ciroc Lofton's character makes a better point in using it than throwing it around as just this is how we're going to show the cops are really bad,
Yeah, he's the black character who doubts that the world is ever going to get better. Yeah. That the world of where a black person could be a commander of a space station and not just I think he says not just shining shoes in space is something that he can't comprehend.
Yeah, it's like they got around the censors on that one the same way Titanic got around having like full frontal nudity in a PG-13 movie because it was like artistic or some shit. Whereas this one, it's like they're making a point. They're not using it in a derogatory. Well, I mean they are, but you know what I mean.
It's not the South Park episode where they swear, where the characters are swearing the whole episode and they're waiting to see the show swear on TV, and the character in the TV show just says, "You got a little shit on your face," and then they go, "Wow." Yeah.
They're making a very specific point by using it the way that they do, and I'm glad that they let them use it because I think it was very impactful there too.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see here. Yeah, I think it's. I think that's why it works. I think that's why it's the city on the edge of forever thing. Like I do think that this is one of the best DS9 episodes, and I guess that I guess my counterpoint to you saying that the best episodes can't do it, or you'd prefer considering a best episode to be something that's sort of in the universe and more representative of what the show actually is.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is. I don't know if I disagree with that point, because that's a personal.
Aren't you saying that this show is that though?
It is, but it's I guess my argument would be that sometimes it needs to step out of what the show is to show you what the show is, if that makes any sense. Like you can kind of get lost in 160 episodes of people walking around the space station, but when they bump it back to another setting and use the exact same themes that they've been talking about, it really resets it for you. And I think it's interesting that it does that.
Well, I would say that I think this is more representative of being a great episode of DS9 than City on the Edge of Forever is being representative of a great episode of TOS.
Yeah,
I think I agree with all of what you're saying, but I still think TOS is just kind of like a sci-fi story that they happen to slap Star Trek on.
Sure.
Whereas this one feels more organic to everything that they're doing with the show. And only works because of the people who are in it and the characters and the way they're positioned and how that relates to the main body of the story. Whereas if you take City on the Edge of Forever and you plug in Scotty in the Kirk role, nothing changes.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's not, nothing in that story hinges on the fact that it's a Star Trek story, or at all. So that's why I will continue down the road of just shit canning that show.
Insisting on balance of terror.
Yes.
Because we always talk about or I've always talked about how like the epic episodes are sometimes stuck in your head as the great episodes as opposed to the little small ones. And I guess this one's interesting because I wouldn't consider this one to be on the epic scale of what City on the Edge of Forever is, because that one had some like really far-reaching repercussions. Like if World War II doesn't happen, then everything is fucked and we never have Starfleet or anything like that.
Right.
This is not, and this one arguably ends with World War II not happening. Like they don't make the change here. Benny Russell kind of goes crazy at the end. He gets fired from his job. He quits, I guess you could say. And then he loses his mind and gets institutionalized or brought to the hospital. And then it smash cuts to Sisko, where the future is the thing that we know. The dreamer is now awake and he's no longer dreaming. But they're commenting on how the show itself is a dream and that you have to sort of keep going towards it. And that's why I don't buy the DS9 as a cynical approach to Star Trek thing, because this episode is clearly not cynical. It's just saying we aren't perfect, obviously. And even if this is a kind of pie in the sky idea, it's worth trying. Yeah.
Well, not to get too heady or deep into the political weeds of stuff that I honestly don't know anything about. But like the idea of TOS Star Trek, of this utopian future where everybody is, racism just doesn't exist anymore. It's a very I think someone who is more directly affected by that stuff can look at that and go like, come on, man, that's not realistic.
Yeah, or you're allowed to be racist against other species, but it's not called racism. Which
exactly.
Is interesting.
It's like you know how they say there's certain progressive movements from the 60s that left out people of color entirely just because, they didn't think about that. It was all forward for one group, but then they're like, we didn't actually include everybody in this thing. So even in that sense, there is some segregation and discrimination involved, even when it's a progressive idea.
Yeah, still happening today, obviously.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where DS9, the angle DS9 is coming from, where it's not cynical. It's like, yeah, obviously that's what we're working towards, but there is a realistic isn't the word. I don't know, rational, I guess, approach to these ideas being like, yeah, these are great, but obviously it's not going to be just a blanket change. These things are still going to exist, and it's putting the pressure on these ideas that really strengthens them. Like right. Ben Sisko pushing back against Starfleet and having Starfleet's resolve still stand strengthens what Starfleet is, you know?
Yep. Right. No, yeah, I'd agree with that. It's about pressure testing, I guess, to see where the cracks start to appear. And this episode thinks that the cracks are... It's commenting on how the cracks were bigger in the past, but they still obviously exist, and it's still something worth talking about. But how in this utopian ideal that doesn't really exist in the real world, the characters are sort of meta-commenting on how they're a dream, and it is the ultimate sort of trying to get there is the noble goal, I suppose. And it's interesting.
It's the difference between everybody going, yeah, you know, that would be great. That is what we should look forward to. And someone else going like, yes, that's true, but here are the things that we have to get over before we get there.
Yeah, I was reading an article about TOS. TOS is kind of astounding when you think about it. Well, it came out in the 60s, right? And they have, there's a man who looks like people that we're currently fighting a war against on the bridge, right? In Sulu. There's a black woman who's part of the command structure at some point. She's obviously not very high up or anything. They don't really do anything with it, but she's on the bridge, which is like remarkable. And also they have a Russian who we are in the middle of the most intense period of the Cold War against. Yeah. And none of those characters in the TOS series are ever mentioned about their race at all, right? Which is fascinating for the era that it came out in. That's all people would have been thinking about. But the show's big leap was to just include them all in this futuristic series, and the only thing they really do is make fun of Russians, which in kind of a lighthearted, non-threatening way, which is funny. But this is the same. This is that the series kind of reckoning with that and drawing more of a direct comparison for things. And TOS chose to ignore and say the best way forward is to ignore, and DS9 chooses to confront.
Yeah, I think it's TOS is the bold new idea. If you're talking like legislation wise. I think TOS is the bold new idea, and DS9 is determining how you're going to pay for it. Essentially,
yeah. That's we're just going to kick the budget down the road to 2020 after the elections. Some topical news right there. Yes, I would. That's a good way to put it, I think, and I think that's why DS9 is probably the pinnacle of Trek, because it actually is the series that took everything to a different extreme. It's like the next evolution. And all the other series eventually sort of fall more in line with things that are to be expected. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about this one? I think this is great. I think this is a great episode. Watched it a couple times. I think all the actors are fantastic. Oh, the one last thing I wanted to say to you. We were talking in the previous episode about strength of casts relative to all the Star Trek series.
Yes.
This episode would be terrible if the TNG cast was involved in it, right?
Yes, it would.
We can agree on that. I think it's unfair to compare the TOS characters because it's really a different style of acting there.
Yeah.
But I think the TNG, like, Spiner would have been out of control in this episode if he was allowed to do anything. I don't know who he would be. He'd probably be the Colm Meaney character, I think.
Yeah.
And he would probably turn in a worse performance and stuff like that. But I think it goes to show you the strength of the DS9 ensemble. I think that everyone here is pretty good at this point, except for maybe ciroc Lofton, who's making a choice, and maybe that's the best thing I can say about it. Yeah, and they also, the writers know their actors well enough to pick characters that they know that they can do well, you know? Mm-hmm. I would also like to say that I managed to go the entire discussion of this episode without referencing the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode that is very similar to this. So does it deal with racism? No, it doesn't deal with racism. It's this episode without any of the social subtext. It's just I think I've mentioned it before. It's where Buffy wakes up and she's in a mental institute. Oh, sure. And there's this other reality that she keeps going back and forth between, where all of the stuff from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer show is shown to be the delusions of a girl who's gone insane. And it's all in her head, basically. And at the end of the episode, the difference between these, well, I guess they're kind of similar, I guess, is she makes a choice to live in the world of the show, quote unquote, and they never make a determination as to which reality is the real reality. Like, they don't
at the end backdoor it and be like, oh, that was all just the manifestations of a demon or whatever. It's they leave it completely open-ended whether or not she just managed to defeat whatever this thing was, or if she is now total recalled it and is now living in the world of the insane, fantasy world that she's created entirely.
You don't know if she took the red pill or the blue pill.
Yeah, basically, yes. Good episode.
Yeah. It's not, I guess, not an uncommon idea here. I guess I appreciate this one just for how thematically solid it is, and I think that everyone does a really fantastic job. I think that they're all. I think it's just an entertaining episode too on itself, and I think that the direction is really good. I love the cuts of, as you brought up with when the cops are beating up Benny Russell and they cut to Wayoon and Ducat in makeup and then cut back to the actual normal policeman uniforms and everything. Mm-hmm. I think they did all that stuff pretty well. And I think that it's clever. And I guess we'll wrap up the discussion. You started by saying you didn't need, there was no explanation for what happened. Do you think you need an explanation for what happened here? Would you be happy if the prophets were responsible for this? That seems like the worst case scenario I would have thought for you.
I think I would be fine with it. It's just that Star Trek, even like the most out there episodes, have some sort of explanation, even if it's like one sentence as to what may or may not have been happening. That this feels closer to fantasy than the show usually goes. Yep. I still think it's a great episode, but I kind of wish they don't even really talk about it. Like, yeah, once Sisko comes out of his thing, it's like, yeah, welcome back. And he's like, yeah, well, that was weird. Like they don't really, there's not really a discussion about it or anything or whatever. So I think maybe something like that would have been nice. I don't think I needed like a final scene where Sisko is reflecting on everything that just happened or anything like that. But
it's a super meta episode. Them talking about whether or not they could end this with a dream sequence is extremely self-aware of what's going on there, about like how you can wrap up an episode and make it feel believable if it's a dream sequence.
Yeah.
This is
like if they had pulled out and it was like, Sisko tripped and fell face first into the electronics of the holodeck. That's not satisfying. But if they had given some little thing where it was like, we were passing through some sort of weird,
temporal distortion
inside a warp shell or some shit. I don't know, with it pierced by a tachyon pulse or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I actually like that they don't do anything with it. I like that it's a totally self-contained little commentary on the show. The series finale, when it comes up, they don't do this. They had originally thought for the longest time that they were going to end it with the final shot being Benny Russell sitting on a television production stage with a script of DS9 in his hands.
Boo!
You wouldn't have liked that?
No. That's too sane elsewhere for me, where you pull out and it's all inside the mind of a
it's a dream
autism
sequence
kid or whatever. Yeah.
It's a dream sequence.
That's cheap. Yeah, I don't like that.
I probably would have a problem with. They don't end it that way. As I'll say that now, so you don't have to worry about it. But they, I feel doing it in this episode is enough, and I feel that this episode ends with them kind of tweaking the nose of the franchise itself and just saying like, look, this is all clearly a dream, and we're not going to discuss it.
That was really how they were thinking about ending the entire series.
Yeah, because they wanted to connect it to this episode, which I sort of understand it. It ties into the writer's discussion about the dream sequence in this one. It's like it does make it more. It does make you think about the series in a different way. I agree that it would be a very frustrating way to end, but I think it also
it shatters the entire franchise.
It does, but I guess you could. Is not the counter argument to that you are kind of living in a. Aren't you taking Odo or Rene Auberjonois' 1950s persona to heart if you're not recognizing that they're fake? Like, are you the person who's kind of like, listen, we got to have rules in this weird universe. Like, we've got to stick to things that matter. I don't know. I think it's weird. I would have been disappointed, but I could also see why they would want to do it that way, especially this series. I could see why they would want to do it that way.
Yeah, I don't know. That's. I don't think that would have been. You may as well just make it a holodeck episode with Riker and Troy. Then at that point, you know, it's the same. It's the same kind of feeling as that, where it's like, oh, so this was all just nothing, huh?
See, is that? I guess there's a. I was listening to Trek Live the other day, and they were talking about the reset button in Star Trek. Do you consider that to be a reset? Is a dream sequence a reset button?
I don't think it's a reset button. I think it's a cancel button.
Just a cop out. What if the characters learn something about it and then goes back? Is it still unsatisfying?
If the character learns something,
if they learn something through the course of the episode, but then it all turns out to be a dream, is it still unsatisfying?
Are you talking about this episode specifically, or like ending?
Just in general, any Star Trek show in general. If you have an episode that sort of resets at the end and everything goes back to the status quo, the course of the episode has caused the character to learn something about it, is that problematic to you, I guess?
No, not at all. Yeah. I mean, that's the point of stories, is to have your character change at the end, you know? It's, I think dream sequences are cop-outs when you, exactly the opposite of what you're saying, when you have all of these things happen to your character that you then are taking back at the end. I think that's when you run into a problem, because if your character comes out of that situation and is fundamentally changed, then technically that stuff still happened, you know? Like,
but when you say that doesn't that happen in this episode? Or maybe not this, but like, wouldn't that be the takeaway if the series had ended that way? Wouldn't you have to say that through the course of everything, Benny Russell here at the end has learned something, or we've learned something about Sisko even?
No, because Benny Russell isn't the character you've been following the whole time.
Okay.
You know, because I think that would, I don't know. It's tough to say without seeing exactly how it played out, but I think pulling the rug out from under everything and going, oh, it was all in the mind of this character we've just met is kind of cheap.
Yeah, I'd agree. I would agree. I have a hard time sort of explaining why I agree. I guess it's almost more of a technical thing of like, I wasted 175 hours for this to happen at the end, as opposed to even if I learned something great and insightful from it, it still feels like a little bit of a betrayal, and I don't know.
Because at the end of the day, Benny Russell, great character, sure. People don't care about Benny Russell; they care about Ben Sisko. Yeah, you know. I think you get into good dream sequences when you get into something like what's the Picard episode where he's in the fake world, Inner Light, where he lives. Yeah. You know that at the end of that, Picard is very visibly a changed person. Yep.
Knows how to play the flute.
So, yeah, and it's not like he just wakes up and he's like, "Well, that was weird."
Right.
I guess I shouldn't have slept with my one hand in the power socket and my other hand in a glass of water.
It was the probe. Yeah, I think the Inner Light would be this. Inner Light is TNG's version of this story, I think.
Yeah.
I think they do a pretty good job. Well, we'll take a break there. Let's play an audio clip, and then we're going to come back and we're going to read some patron thoughts, give our final thoughts for Far Beyond the Stars.
Well, you can't fire me. I quit. To hell with you, and to hell with Stone!
Try to stay calm, Benny.
No, I'm tired of being calm. Calm never got me a damn thing.
I'm warning you, Benny, if you don't stop this, I'm going to call the police.
You go ahead, call them! Call anybody you want. They can't do anything to me. Not anymore, and nor can any of you. Human being, damn it. You can deny me all you want, but you cannot deny Ben Sisko exists. That future, that space station, all those people, they exist in here. In my mind, I created it. And every one of you know it. You read it. It's here. You hear what I'm telling you? You can pulp a story, but you cannot destroy an idea. Don't you understand? That's ancient knowledge. You cannot destroy an idea. That future, I created it, and it's real. Don't you understand? It is real. I created it, and it's real. It's real. Oh, God.
All right, everybody. So, if you enjoyed the content today, us talking about the past, 1950s, and Star Trek, you can support the show at patreon.com/the Pensky File. A couple $2 a month, you get extra stuff like podcasts and all that stuff. You also get a shout out if you are a captain tier supporter. Special thank yous go to Andrew Cherlog, Ben Douglas, Bradley Killens, Captain Quark, Cardinal Doomsday, Christian Pouch, David K, Dwayne Hackett, Eric Johnson, Yarpy, Joint Mango, Kevin Reyes, Kyle Barrett, Matt Cutler, Matt Ross, Mike Burnett, Nathan Elliott, Neil Brennan, Nick Sergi, Robert Cummins, Russell Elledge, Samuel Custer, Grim Santo, Sean Spinobi, Stephen Cobb, Tark Latif, and Will Yates. Thank you very much, guys, for supporting the show. Hope you enjoyed the content today. Now, let's go to Patron Thoughts. If you're a patron, you can also leave your thoughts about upcoming episodes, and we read them and react to them. Far Beyond the Stars, Captain Quark says, I honestly wouldn't mind seeing the tragic tale of Benny Russell adapted into a feature-length film. The overall story was an interesting take on racial injustice of the era. The framing device of Sisko's disillusionment with his role in Starfleet is a somewhat awkward way of getting to Benny Russell's story, even though I enjoy and empathize with the captain's mental conflict resulting from the war. Great acting from most of the cast in different roles. One notable exception is ciroc Lofton's portrayal of a street kid, which comes off like an SNL caricature. We didn't really talk.
He does seem like a Fred Armisen character.
We didn't really talk about the relationship between what's going on in the DS9 universe and this world. Do you think it works well, where Sisko's disillusionment with the war pairs off against his sort of fighting injustice in the past as Benny Russell?
Yeah. I think it's spiritually similar. I actually liked that it wasn't a direct line, because I think you can get a little bit more of an interesting story out of it if it's not just.
It's just fighting for what you believe in. Both characters have to realize that
if it wasn't in the 50s, Benny Russell is the only black captain on the Chicago police force. You know what I mean?
Right,
Where
yeah.
it's not a direct one-to-one.
That's true. Like he's another character in a command position going against something. Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's subtle. It's there. If I have one problem, it does that weird episodic thing where Sisko feeling like he's going to quit at the start feels like it comes out of nowhere. He's like, God damn it, another ship blew up, I quit. And then he has this epiphany and everything turns out okay. But it works for what it is. It's just something that always catches me off guard. A very funny line where, Kira's like, that ship blew up. He's like, God damn it. She's like, you were friends with Captain Smith, weren't you? He goes, I introduced him to his wife. It's like, that's the peak of knowing somebody.
I will say, I know, yeah, they always use that too. Like, that's always something that comes up, is where it's like, well, he introduced me to my wife. Like, it's not, like, it's more than just someone going like, hey, Chris, this is my friend Charlene. See you guys later.
Yeah, at a work party, you just meet with you're just like remembering that person who introduced you forever, yeah.
Yeah, but I actually, as I was watching it, that opening scene, I thought there was going to be something screwy about it, because I didn't think the acting in the first scene was particularly good.
It's not.
It felt, it felt like something was off, and like it was one of those things where I couldn't tell if it was just not good or if it was intentionally not good. So I was expecting something like, Sisko was going to realize he was in a simulated world. I technically I was right, but just not in the way I thought I was.
Right. Yeah.
It just felt really off for some reason. So I was kind of watching those first couple scenes with through squinty eyes, waiting for the turn to come. But it didn't happen obviously the way that I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Which character took you the longest to recognize who they were?
Martok.
Oh, really? I thought his voice would have given him away right away.
Yeah. I mean, I recognized the voice, but I couldn't place it because his face is so different.
Yes.
Like, I was like, I think that's Martok.
He's also the only white Klingon
Yes. Yeah. I was just, I think it's Martok, but I can't make out the face. I'm almost positive it's Martok, but I wasn't totally sure. Also, I was not expecting Nog to be like a very tiny 45-year-old man. I always assumed Nog was like 17. I thought he was the same age as ciroc Lofton.
No, he's older. People are going to think poorly of me, but I did not recognize Michael Dorn as the baseball player when he makes his first appearance walking down the hallways of DS9 and he goes into the room.
Oh, yeah.
It took until I saw him in the diner to be like, oh, of course, it's Michael Dorn.
Well, he was one that I caught. Well, also because I kind of know what he looks like generally, but I also his voice gave it away for me as soon as he came through. Because that he's only in it super quickly in that first scene where he's walking through the hallway.
Yeah, it says
so
Benny play catch or something. Yeah.
I can see missing that. But when he said that, I was like, yeah, that sounds like Dorn.
Yeah. The Worf voice is just a kind of more intense version of his normal voice. It's funny. But yeah, I would say that Dorn, when you see him acting like this, you do get a sense of he is acting to play Worf. Like that is it seems kind of obvious to say it now because he's like this growling Klingon most of the time, but it is a difference from his normal acting persona to play that way.
Yeah, much more smiling.
Yeah, right. Zam Nuclear Wessel says, far beyond the stars, I love everyone's second characters there, including Lofton's. It's too bad Clay isn't there to suggest a job he might get other than dishwasher and a messenger boy. It ends in machine. No, we did. There's no.
I get it.
That's the.
Well, I mean, he was a street ne'er-do-well, so who knows what else he's been into? He might be. I mean, those watches, he had to pay for those watches. I mean, unless he stole the watches, but he might moonlight as a gigolo. I don't know. Yeah,
it's hard to tell. We barely knew him. Let's see here. The next one that is not it. Matthew Ross says, I think this was very well executed, shot artistically and visually stimulating, well acted with a strong message. However, when it came out and someone told me that this was the last episode, I was annoyed. We all know that the whole series is made up. Why break the fourth wall more to tell us that our show is a show? Sci-fi is escapism just like any other entertainment, and this concept has been done repeatedly from the short story Strange New Worlds, 2S actors beamed to the Enterprise, to the more recent Red Shirts novel by Scalzi that said the callbacks to the racial political tensions that still exist, the sets and the costumes, even the callbacks to TOS's court-martial with the cover of Galaxy magazine showing Starbase 11 was well displayed. Yet I was more than happy to see them return to space and our regular characters at the next episode when wondering if the show was pure psychosis that we all share. Kind of what we talked about at the end.
It is interesting how making something all a dream, I mean, they talk about it in the episode, making something all a dream kind of cuts the legs off of the idea.
Yeah.
In a really interesting way. The silent movie, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari?
Mm-hmm.
So that also bookends with it being the ravings of a madman in an insane asylum, and then it was all just made up. It was all a dream. And for some reason, that is viewed as taking away the power of what the story is about, because that movie originally didn't have that ending. It was just played straight. This is the story about, this carnival guy and his sort of zombie dude who's killing people and whatever.
Crazy world, yeah.
Yeah. And it was seen as very critical of the German government at the time. And so the German government would not release the movie because it was so critical. So they had to put this dream sequence,
You're crazy for thinking this. You're a crazy person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To see everything that you just watched, even though in and of itself is fiction and ridiculous, is just the ravings of a madman. It was all just a dream. It's not actually positing these political ideas. So it's really fascinating how making something a dream just completely railroads it.
Yeah, I guess my point, if I could try to sum it up again, just because I don't think I was making it very clear, would be like Matt Ross just said, the whole show was a pure psychosis that we all share, saying that it's a negative to make the show. The dream sequence makes it seem like it is a psychosis. I guess my argument would be it is a psychosis to think that. You know what I mean? Like to interpret the show as something that it's like, it feels like a waste of time to say that it's all a dream, which is something that I agree with. But to be critical of the show ending in a dream sequence, saying that this was all a dream and therefore it was a psychosis, I feel that that's a weirdly true thing that we're upset by. You know, like if we're getting annoyed by the way that a fictional story ends, we have a strange relationship to the fictional story in the first place. It's just it's interesting because I would agree that dream sequences usually undercut it, and I don't know why in your case or in the case of Caligari or things like that, it sometimes seems okay to do things like that. Doesn't seem to be much of a rhyme or reason for it, though.
I think part of it is that when it's used as a cop-out, or I shouldn't say that.
If
when
it's the
used
fix to the solution, it's a problem, it's a huge problem, or a fix to the problem,
But I also think doing it, I agree with that, but I also think there's a level of, it almost feels like that the creator is not taking what they just showed you seriously, and they're kind of insulting you if you then took it seriously.
Oh, sure, it's so like a joke. It's like you're trolling your audience, sort of.
Yeah. So if you're invested in this show, and the whole point of, or one of the main tenets of fiction in general is the suspension of disbelief. It's like if you were to go to WrestleMania, right? And then at the end of WrestleMania, Vince McMahon walks into the middle of the ring and goes, it's all fake, right? It's like you are investing yourself into this story, and then for the creator to come in and be like, yeah, well, fuck it. It's kind of insulting on a certain level.
Yeah, this is interesting because when I asked you about the DS9 wrapping up with that dream sequence, all I'm doing in my head is picturing the way that the show actually ends and then tagging it with that scene. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I'm still seeing the series resolve itself in a way that tells the complete story within the universe, but then it's kind of a little tag on the end of saying, remember the lessons of Benny Russell, kind of.
Okay, well, all right. That's arguable. I could see that working, I think.
Yeah. Did you see Black Klansman?
I did, yes.
Okay. I'm thinking of a better version of what Black Klansman did at the end. You know where they showed the real news reports of Charlottesville?
Yes, yeah.
That to me felt like a bad example of it was all a dream, sort of. That's not really what Black Klansman is saying, but it felt like it was I don't know if this was necessary at the very end. Like, I kind of get that the movie is saying this, but it's weird that you inserted this very recent event in there. And
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it worked for me, even though I understand what the point was, but I'm kind of viewing the dream sequences in the same way as that, I think.
Yeah. That's actually kind of an interesting one to cite, because they're kind of going out of their way to show that this stuff actually is happening.
It's an anti-dream.
Yeah, it's like a reverse dream sequence.
It's like what you've been watching is all a dream, but get real, motherfuckers, because it's actually happening.
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually really interesting.
Kyle Barrett says, Far Beyond the Stars, the mechanics of the episode and the teaser that doesn't know when to end may be a little clunky, and Sisko's final speech may get a bit too literal with the dream stuff, but everything between those two slightly flawed bookends is perfect. The episode could have been in danger of being too meta and self-congratulatory, but it gracefully strides that line, and despite everything it's saying and how emotional it can get, it's also very entertaining to watch. Like City on the Edge of Forever and TOS, this is a very atypical episode of the show, and yet is one of the very best of the series.
He did point out something that I forgot, is that opening cold open is like 15 minutes long. It's super long.
It is, yeah. It goes on for a long time to get them into it. But I felt that the stuff in the 50 sequences was the right length of time. I didn't feel it went too long, and it wasn't too short.
I would
or
agree.
Anything.
Yeah.
Neil Brennan, final comment. Far Beyond the Stars. Maybe I could have done with a little more in the final moments, but otherwise this was A+ science fiction / morality tale. Interesting to see the actors playing double roles. Feels like their performances here serve as a decent ranking of their overall talent. Parentheses, Colm Meaney, I still love you, but not your finest hour. So that's it. Thank you, patrons, for your thoughts.
Just to say, I would argue that this is not really science fiction, because there is not really a scientific thing involved with the story, right? It's a straight up fantasy sequence.
That's like do you think that the being set in the... I would argue yes, except for the fact that it bookends by being on DS9.
Sure, but I mean, like, if you have a book about an astronaut who falls asleep and has a crazy dream, I don't necessarily
Yeah.
think that would be called science fiction, you know?
That's true.
So which is kind of why I was expecting a bit of an explanation, some sort of, you know, technobabble sci-fi explanation as to what happened.
Yeah.
Even if you wanted to go, sure, the prophets, you know, accidentally spilled some of their acid into his drink or whatever.
Okay. So you seem unswayed by what Memory Alpha says. I also feel unswayed because I do not believe this actually was a vision of the prophets. But I guess the episode is saying that at the same time. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, if the intent is that, I mean, even there it's like tenuously sci-fi. If the intent is that this is all some sort of vision given to him by the prophets, then sure, I guess it counts as science fiction. But
Okay.
barring that, it does not feel like it is a science fiction story to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's wrap it up there. Those are all the patron comments. Thank you guys for leaving your thoughts about the show. Thank you for supporting the show. And everyone else, you can go to patreon.com/the Pensky File if you want to leave your thoughts and if you want to support the podcast. So, Clay, what are you going to give this one on our scale of 1 to 5?
I'm going to give it a 5. I was thinking at the beginning of taking a point away based entirely on the fact that it's not actually explained as how any of this happens, but I think that would be me being kind of petty, I think.
I'm honestly a little bit surprised that it's something that's stuck in your craw that much.
Well, you know, it doesn't always, I think explanations aren't always important. I think most of the time they're not, or let me put it this way. I think explanations are not as important as a lot of people think that they are.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in some instances, it especially if you're doing something like this, it helps to ground it in the story that you have been telling up to this point, you know?
Yeah, it's funny because I'll go back and say that you gave The Visitor a 4, and The Visitor does that very much, where it's a sci-fi accident that causes the entire story to go off on itself.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that that's the reason why you thought that you didn't enjoy that one as much, but you'd have preferred a Visitor sort of plot structure to it, where something sci-fi causes these things to happen?
I guess, yeah. I mean, again, it doesn't have to be like you don't
Sisko
have to take 20 minutes to explain
console.
it. Yeah, you know, something simple. It's just so strange that like if you took that explanation out of The Visitor, I probably would have liked that episode even less.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I think that one they do it. You know, as far as dream sequences and stuff go, I think that what The Visitor does really nicely is that when you come back to the beginning, or you know whatever, Jake is now fundamentally changed by everything that he's seen, right?
Yeah.
You know, and which legitimizes everything you just watched, even though it quote unquote technically didn't happen.
Right.
Whereas this one, it's like, sure, he's having these visions. Yeah, it's affecting him, I guess, but the fact that it's just, you know, even if they had said, Commander, that was a weird stroke you just had. You know, it's just that they don't even attempt to go for it. It's just so strange to me.
Yeah, the way I see this episode happening 9 times out of 10 is that Sisko's reading a book about that period and falls asleep.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, yes. Yeah.
And I find that less satisfying than this, even though this is not an explanation. Yeah.
100%, because I think that way you are explicitly undercutting what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where taking the story seriously comes into play as far as making it a dream sequence. Because then it's like, oh well, you know, it was just a dream. You know, it's just a manifestation of what he happened to be reading before he went to bed. So there's not actually any real lasting impact about what what we just saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they had made it a little clearer that it was a vision generated by the prophets, I think I'd be fine with it.
Interesting. All right, so I'm going to give it a 5 as well. I think it's great. I think it's one of the top 5 DS9 episode. I would put it somewhere in there. I think that it has a lot to say. I like that it reboots in my brain what the series is actually talking about. I think it's just a sort of a great turn of events for the show. And I think that every Star Trek series needs this kind of an episode. It usually does have one like this, and this one turns out pretty well. That's it. So, thank you, patrons, for supporting the show. Everyone else, go to patreon.com/the Pensky File if you want to support us. A couple dollars a month, you get podcasts and stuff like that. It's a pretty good deal, and it helps keep the show running. Much appreciated. Thank you very much, guys. Outside of that, you can click all the social media links down below in the video description or the podcast blurb. Follow us on social media, blah, blah, blah. You can buy t-shirts. You can go to the Discord channel. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do that's related to the show. And I think that's it. I don't think I have anything else. I'm quickly looking through my list. No, I don't have anything else. We got Radio Star Murders coming up. We got some Badass coming next week. We've got Real Ripe and Rotten coming back at some point. And we'll have our Patreon podcast out this week as well. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
Again, Kickstarter happening for my book, Bloody Hell, which is happening very, very soon. To the point where I'm starting to get a little bit tight in the chest about it. But when that does happen, you will know all about it.
It's a story about a black man in the 1950s who has a dream.
I feel uniquely qualified to write this story. So it's it's a story I've been wanting to tell for a long time. I write the dialogue in very authentic dialect. That
it's like the airplane script. It's a lot of jive turkeys and stuff like that.
Yes, I don't personally find anything, culturally wrong with me doing that, but
all culture is cultural appropriation, which I actually believe. But let's get out of here. So check out the Kickstarter.
That's a discussion for a different show.
If anyone can argue with that, I'd like to. Let's end this with this is actually, why did I want to talk about this? Screen Rant. Do you know the website Screen Rant?
Sure.
I'm constantly kind of amazed when I sort of treat all blogs as equal, and like if a blog looks nice, I kind of give it like the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, well, there must be some seasoned like writers writing for this. I've been doing some research for the not research, but like other shows. I try to find articles and stuff to tweet about, and Screen Rant's articles are awful. Like they're terrible. It's like they're written by people in high school or something. Like they just make terrible points and they do terrible things. But it reminds me of the music magazine Pitchfork. Yep. I thought Pitchfork was like a respected music magazine, and I started reading a bunch of their articles and I couldn't believe how bad they were. And then I started researching what people thought about Pitchfork, and every other serious music critic is like, Pitchfork is the worst. Like, no one should reach Pitchfork. And yeah,
I always understood Pitchfork to be like if your music snob friend from high school got a magazine, where it's like, whatever, man.
Yeah, so
but I mean, that being said, that review of the what the hell's the name of that band? Greta Van Fleet album, that was pretty good.
Yeah, they're right on when they get their pretentiousness, because I think it started by I started looking up Pitchfork Spotify playlists. They're like the best 200 songs of the 80s and things like that. So I'm like, cool. And I have never heard of 92% of the songs on the list.
So like deep cuts off of Kraftwerk albums,
right? And like they stick in like 10 world music albums, which is fine, but I've never heard of the artists. I've never heard of any of these, and so it's like I maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. And obviously, great music exists out of stuff that I know, but I kind of anticipated more of like a pop culture list than Pitchfork is giving me.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's music I don't know. Yeah.
I've always understood Pitchfork to be like, if you're sick of pop culture music, then go to Pitchfork.
Yeah.
Because they will share that disdain with you and point you towards shit that nobody else.
The reason I did the cultural appropriation thing is because the Pitchfork article that put me off was there was a review of like a Sting album that I stumbled across, and they were just saying that they didn't appreciate Sting as a white man appropriating world music influences. And it's just like, what the fuck do you think music is, people? Like, this is all music is this kind of stuff. I don't know what you're talking about, but that's what set me off on this trail of trying to find out why people didn't like Pitchfork, and that's something.
Yeah, I think those arguments are valid in some spaces, but the music ones are, unless I feel like it's music is such a gray area as far as that stuff goes. There are definitely instances where people are like just capitalizing off of a cultural thing or whatever, but like, how are you supposed to make music if you're not influenced by other music?
Yeah.
You know?
Culture doesn't just come out of the ether, is my point. All culture comes from somewhere else. So it's going to borrow from other things. Yeah. Let's see here. I think that's it. We're done. Kickstarter. Bloody hell. Check out the Patreon. All that stuff. We're going to be back in a couple days with the next episode after this one, which is Honor Among Thieves. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.